The Galactic Empire had seen thousands of species rise and fall under its rule. Civilizations bowed before its might, their cultures assimilated or crushed. To them, humanity was nothing more than another primitive species, barely worth notice, weak, fragile, and utterly unremarkable. Until we laughed. It started with the first human envoy to the Imperial Council, a meeting of the most advanced races in the known universe. The council chamber was an immense, marble-like structure floating in the void of space, surrounded by the glittering stars of conquered worlds. Seated in a vast circle were the galaxy's most powerful leaders, their forms as varied as their homeworlds, scaled, feathered, tentacled, crystalline, and things beyond description. At the center stood Ambassador James Carter, the first human to ever step into the chamber. He was alone, a single, unarmed man representing an entire planet. The High Chancellor of the Empire, a towering reptilian with molten gold eyes, addressed him with a sneer. "Humanity of Sol," he said, his voice a rumbling earthquake. "You stand before the Council of Galactic Supremacy. State your case, though I assure you it will change nothing. Your kind is weak, insignificant, and doomed to serve." The chamber filled with murmurs of amusement. Some delegates even chittered in their own guttural tongues, their equivalent of laughter. The Empire had encountered countless civilizations, and none had withstood its rule. Humanity would be no different. Then James Carter did something no species had ever done before. He laughed, not a nervous chuckle, not a bitter scoff, a full, genuine, belly-aching laugh, the kind that makes you slap your knee and struggle to breathe. The entire chamber fell silent. Some species blinked, others stiffened. The High Chancellor's molten eyes narrowed. "What? Do you find amusing, human?" James wiped a tear from his eye. Sorry, it's just..." He let out another chuckle. "You actually think we're weak?" The silence deepened. The air grew thick with tension. The High Chancellor bared his fangs. "Are you mocking us?" "Yeah," James grinned. "Yeah, I guess I am." A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. No species had ever dared speak to the Empire this way. Empires were feared, not mocked. They were destroyers, not the butt of a joke. "You misunderstand the power before you," the High Chancellor growled. "Our fleet has conquered thousands of worlds. Our soldiers have crushed entire armies. Our weapons could reduce your homeworld to ash in seconds. You are insects before us." James tilted his head, still smirking. "And yet you're scared of a joke." A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. Some species understood humor, most did not. But fear was universal. "You misunderstand nothing." The Chancellor slammed a clawed hand against the armrest of his throne. "You are insignificant. You have no technology to rival ours, no armies capable of standing against us, no genetic superiority, no psychic potential. You have nothing." James leaned forward, resting his hands on the podium. "Oh, we have something, all right." The Chancellor's glare intensified. "And what, human, do you have—" James's grin widened. "We have us." A murmur spread through the chamber. The Chancellor scoffed. "Us? Do not speak in riddles, human. Your kind is nothing." "That's what you don't get," James said, his voice steady. "Every species you've conquered? They fought like you expected them to, with strength, with power, with logic. But humans? We fight differently. We fight dirty. We fight smart. And above all..." His grin turned sharp. "We fight like we've got nothing to lose." The chamber remained silent, but the weight of his words hung in the air. "Every species you've crushed had a breaking point," James continued. "A moment where they realized they couldn't win. A moment where they gave up." He took a step forward. "Humans don't have that moment." The Chancellor scoffed. Arrogant words. You think so? James raised an eyebrow. Tell me, how many of your conquered species made weapons that could destroy entire planets before they even left their solar system? The murmurs grew louder. How many of your species wiped themselves out multiple times in their own history and kept coming back? The murmurs became a nervous buzz. How many of your species found a way to turn their own emotions into a weapon? You think you understand rage, hate, desperation? You don't, but we do, and we use it. The High Chancellor shifted in his throne. For the first time, his eyes betrayed something beyond annoyance, doubt. James saw it and pressed on. You don't understand humans, not really. You look at our size, our strength, our short lifespans, and you think we're weak. But you forgot the one thing that makes us dangerous. And what is that? The Chancellor growled. We don't know when to quit. He stepped back, letting his words sink in. Every species you fought, they understood when they were beaten. When they saw the fight was hopeless, they surrendered. That's the smart move, right? Logical. His voice dropped. Humans aren't logical. Silence. The council chamber, once filled with mockery, now pulsed with an unspoken tension. You can conquer our worlds, James said, his voice almost a whisper. You can burn our cities. You can kill our leaders. But you'll never break us, because the moment you think you've won, we'll still be there. He leaned in, voice barely audible. And we'll be laughing. For the first time in history, the Galactic Empire had no response. And that was when humanity won. The silence in the chamber stretched on, thick and heavy. For the first time in its long and bloody history, the Galactic Council did not know how to respond. They had encountered defiance before, of course. Entire civilizations had thrown themselves against the might of the Empire, only to be ground into dust. But this was different. This wasn't defiance in the face of superior power. This was amusement. The High Chancellor's molten gold eyes remained locked on James Carter, searching for weakness, for some sign that this human was bluffing. But there was nothing. No fear. No hesitation. Just that maddening, infuriating grin. You overestimate yourselves, the Chancellor finally said, his voice quieter now, more measured. Your kind has only just stepped into the void, while we have ruled the stars for millennia. Your ships are primitive, your technology laughable. Your military, he sneered, is nothing but an unruly pack of savages with crude weapons. James folded his arms. And yet, here you are, trying real hard to convince yourself that we aren't a problem. He chuckled. Let me guess, this little speech of yours, it's for them. He gestured to the other council members, trying to keep them from realizing what you just did. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. And what, human, have I just realized? James leaned forward, resting his elbows on the podium, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You're afraid of us. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. The tension shifted, subtle but undeniable. Before, it had been the laughter of an arrogant empire mocking a lesser species. Now? Now it felt like something else entirely. Now it felt like doubt. The High Chancellor scoffed, but there was something forced about it. You are mistaken, he said. Your kind is insignificant. You will be brought to heel, like all the others. James raised an eyebrow. Will we? The Chancellor straightened. Your planet will be given an opportunity, he announced, addressing the chamber once more. Submit willingly, and you will be allowed to exist under imperial rule. Resist, and Sul will burn. A murmur of agreement rippled through the council. It was the same ultimatum that had been given to countless species before. The same choice, servitude or annihilation. James tilted his head, as if considering the offer. Then, very deliberately, he pulled something from his pocket. A small black rectangle. The Chancellor's eyes flicked to it. "What is that?" James grinned. "Oh, just my communicator. Thought I'd show you something." He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward the gathered council. A hologram flickered to life. A live feed from somewhere deep in space. The perspective was shaky, the image grainy, but it was clear enough. A fleet. A human fleet. Dozens of ships, ugly and brutish compared to the sleek, elegant designs of the Imperial Armada. Scarred hulls, mismatched components, weapons that looked bolted on rather than properly integrated. A patchwork force, cobbled together from whatever humanity had been able to muster. But they weren't retreating. They weren't hiding. They were advancing. The murmurs in the chamber grew louder. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. "A desperate display," he scoffed. "Your ships are obsolete. They will be nothing but debris by the end of the cycle." James smirked. "Maybe. But you missed something." He swiped the screen, changing the angle of the feed. The perspective shifted, zooming in on a single vessel. A massive, hulking dreadnought. And painted across its hull, in bright, defiant letters, was a single phrase. "Nice try." The chamber erupted into chaos. Council members turned to one another, confused, uncertain. The Chancellor's expression darkened. "What does this mean?" he demanded. James leaned back, looking far too relaxed for someone who had just threatened an empire. "It means," he said, "you've already lost." The Chancellor bared his fangs. "Explain." James shrugged. "You think we don't know how outmatched we are? That we don't know our ships are weaker, our weapons outdated?" He chuckled. "You don't get it, do you? We're not here to win." He gestured to the hologram. "That fleet. It's not a fleet. It's a message." The murmurs grew louder. The Chancellor's claws tightened around the armrests of his throne. "A message?" James grinned. "Yeah, it says, 'Come and get us.'" The room fell silent again. "This isn't like your other wars," James continued. "Those species you crushed, they wanted to survive. They wanted to win. But humanity?" He laughed. "We're crazy enough to enjoy this." He stepped forward, resting his hands on the podium. "You think you can break us? Go ahead. Try. Wipe out a city, we'll turn the rubble into a bunker. Kill 1,000,000 of us, and 10 million more will pick up a gun. We'll fight you with knives, with rocks, with our bare hands if we have to." He leaned in. "Because we don't fear you. We welcome the fight." The High Chancellor said nothing. His claws dug into the throne, cracking the stone beneath them. James smiled wider. "So yeah, you can conquer us, you can kill us, but you'll never stop us." He spread his arms. "And the best part? We'll be laughing the whole damn time." And with that, he turned off the communicator, placed it back in his pocket, and casually walked towards the exit. He didn't need to stay to hear the Chancellor's response. Because deep down, they all knew. The war had already begun, and humanity had already won. The High Chancellor sat in silence, his molten gold eyes locked on the place where James Carter had stood moments ago. Around him, the council chamber was a storm of noise, frantic murmurs, nervous whispers, and the hushed growls of those who had begun to understand the true weight of what had just happened. For the first time in the Empire's long and violent history, a species had not only refused to kneel, but had mocked them, and that terrified them. A member of the Zareth Dominion, a crystalline being whose form shimmered like fractured ice, spoke up. This cannot stand," it hissed, its voice sharp as breaking glass. "The humans are primitive, but they are dangerous. Their existence threatens the very structure of the Empire." A six-limbed warlord from the Golan clans slammed a fist against the table. "They are madmen. To defy the Empire is one thing, but to mock it? His mandibles clicked furiously. We should wipe them out now, before their insanity spreads. Yes, came another voice, this time from a shadowy figure wrapped in layers of deep blue silk. A quick, decisive extermination. Their planet must burn. But not everyone agreed. The emissary of the Zilari, a species of tall, silver-skinned beings with luminous eyes, raised a delicate hand. Are you all truly so blind? She asked softly, but her voice cut through the noise like a blade. Did you not see what the human was doing? The chamber fell into an uneasy silence. She turned her glowing gaze toward the High Chancellor. This was no mere defiance, no desperate attempt at intimidation. The human was playing with us. The Chancellor did not respond. She continued, her voice growing firmer. He wanted us to react this way, to lash out, to declare war, and we are falling into his hands exactly as he planned. The warlord growled. You suggest we do nothing? The emissary smiled. Number one suggests we think. Another council member, a hunched and wrinkled being whose species had long served the Empire as record keepers, cleared his throat. The humans, they are unlike anything we have encountered before, he said, his voice ancient and weary. Their history is a series of conflicts, each more brutal than the last. They have never known peace for long. War is not an aberration to them. It is their natural state. The Chancellor's claws dug into his throne. He had known this, of course. The briefings on humanity had been clear. They had fought each other for millennia, waged wars that defied reason, slaughtered their own kind over gods, land, pride. They had developed weapons of mass destruction before they even left their own atmosphere. And yet, despite all of that, perhaps because of it, they had survived, thrived. He thought of the words James Carter had spoken. You don't know when to quit. He thought of the human fleet, those crude, battered ships flying straight toward an enemy they had no hope of defeating. And he realized something. James Carter had been telling the truth. The humans were not here to win. They were here to make the war unwinnable. The Chancellor exhaled slowly, suppressing the growl in his throat. He turned to the gathered council, his expression unreadable. Prepare the fleet, he commanded. The chamber erupted in a frenzy of approval. The war had begun. Deep in the void of space, aboard the bridge of the UNS Ironclad, James Carter sat comfortably in his chair, sipping a cup of terrible instant coffee. You think they bought it? Asked Captain Valdez, standing beside him. James chuckled. Oh, they bought it, all right. Valdez folded her arms, watching the holographic display of the Empire's fleet mobilizing. You do realize we don't actually have a plan to win this, right? James grinned. Yeah, and that's exactly why we will. She raised an eyebrow. James leaned back, kicking his feet up onto the console. See, they're used to wars with rules, with objectives, with endgames. We don't do that. We don't fight to win. We fight to make them regret ever starting it in the first place. Valdez exhaled. So we just make their lives hell? James smirked. Exactly. They want a war. He took another sip of coffee. Then let's give them one they'll never forget. And in the cold depths of space, the laughter of humanity echoed. The Imperial war machine moved swiftly. Within days, the first waves of their armada began assembling on the edges of human space, an overwhelming force of dreadnoughts, cruisers, and carriers that had crushed 100 civilizations before. They were ready for war. What they weren't ready for was us. Somewhere in deep space, aboard the UNS Ironclad, James Carter and Captain Valdez stood before a massive holo map of the Sol system. Around them, a handful of commanders and specialists studied the map, their faces grim but determined. They'll hit us hard, Valdez said, arms folded. A full-scale invasion. They're bringing their biggest guns, their deadliest ships. We won't win in a head-on fight. James grinned. Good. We're not going to fight them head-on. One of the officers, a grizzled veteran named Lieutenant Singh, frowned. Sir, with all due respect, how the hell are we supposed to win this? James took a sip of his coffee and set it down on the table. Singh, tell me something. How do you beat a predator that's bigger, stronger, and faster than you? Singh hesitated. You don't? James pointed at him. Exactly. You don't. You make it chase you, you frustrate it, you exhaust it. He smirked. We're not here to fight them. We're here to make them regret ever stepping foot into our system. A younger officer raised an eyebrow. And how do we do that? James's smirk widened. We do what humans do best. We become their worst nightmare. The Imperial fleet moved with mechanical precision, its formations tight, its ships gleaming with the cold efficiency of a war machine that had never known failure. As they entered human-claimed space, they expected resistance, a desperate defense, perhaps even an attempted surrender. What they got was chaos. The first attack came not from battleships, but from debris. Clusters of old satellites, space junk, and broken-down cargo freighters had been booby-trapped, loaded with explosives and hidden in asteroid fields. As soon as Imperial ships approached, the debris detonated. Not enough to destroy them outright, but enough to cause damage, disrupt their shields, and force them to recalculate their formations. Then came the electronic warfare. Every Imperial fleet ran on tight, well-coordinated data networks, until human hackers got involved. They hijacked communication lines, flooded enemy targeting systems with false readings, turned Imperial ship sensors against them, making them fire on phantoms, ghost signals that flickered in and out like enemy ships that weren't really there. Entire squadrons broke formation trying to chase after enemies that didn't exist. Then, as confusion spread through the fleet, the real attacks began. Small, fast-moving human ships, cobbled together from old cargo haulers and retrofitted civilian vessels, darted through the chaos, hitting weak points and disappearing before the Empire could retaliate. It wasn't war, it was harassment. The Empire had fought wars before. It had crushed rebellions, conquered entire star systems. But it had never faced an enemy that refused to engage in a proper battle. We need to bring them to order, one of the Imperial admirals growled, watching the erratic, seemingly random human attacks. They are acting like vermin. A silence fell over the command bridge. Because that was exactly the problem. Humans weren't fighting like soldiers. They were fighting like hunters, like guerrillas, like terrorists, like an enemy that didn't need to win, just needed to make the other side miserable. The Empire had expected an enemy that would submit or perish. Instead, they had found an enemy that was laughing while they burned everything down. And it was only the beginning. Back aboard the ironclad, James Carter watched the reports roll in. Another supply convoy lost. Another Imperial battleship forced into retreat. Another communication relay jammed beyond repair, all without a single major battle. Valdez let out a low whistle. I think they're starting to get pissed. James grinned. Good. Angry enemies make mistakes. Singh shook his head in disbelief. We're actually making this work. James leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Oh, Singh, we're just getting started. Because this wasn't a war of conquest. This wasn't a war of strategy. This was a war of attrition. And humanity was very, very good at making people regret their decisions. The Imperial fleet had never known fear. Until now. The High Chancellor sat in his private war chamber aboard the Indomitable, the largest and most powerful dreadnought in the Imperial Armada. Around him, his most trusted generals and admirals stood, their faces grim as they watched the latest battle reports. Or rather, the latest disasters. Entire squadrons lost without a single proper engagement. Supply lines severed, communications disrupted. Their fleet was enormous, their weapons superior. And yet, they were losing. Not in the sense of defeat, but in the slow, excruciating way a predator starves because its prey refuses to be caught. "This is unacceptable," one of the admirals hissed, his scaled face tight with barely contained fury. "We came to crush them, yet they mock us at every turn." The High Chancellor's golden eyes flickered toward the holomap. The humans had no fleet to rival theirs, no planetary defenses that could stand against Imperial bombardment, and yet the Empire's forces were struggling. Because humanity wasn't fighting a war, they were playing a game, a cruel, insane, brilliantly effective game. The moment an Imperial fleet settled into orbit around a human-controlled colony, the madness would begin. False distress signals lured ships into ambushes. Space stations, seemingly abandoned, would suddenly explode, taking entire destroyers with them. Human ships, barely held together scraps of metal and desperation, suicidally rammed into Imperial carriers, detonating payloads designed to pierce even the strongest armor. And the worst part? The messages. On every wrecked Imperial ship, on every hacked transmission, on every intercepted signal, humanity left messages. Some were taunts. "That all you got? Try harder. Oops, did we do that?" Others were worse. Imperial soldiers found their own security footage played back at them, but edited, showing themselves being ambushed, their commanders slain, their ships burning. It hadn't happened yet, but it would. Humanity was taunting them with their own future. The psychological toll was devastating. The Empire had never fought an enemy like this. They had fought warriors, conquerors, armies that met them on the battlefield. But humans? Humans fought like monsters. They burrowed into shadows, struck from the dark, laughed in the face of annihilation, and worst of all, they were having fun. The Imperial officers were losing control of their own soldiers. There were rumors spreading, terrible, stupid rumors, that human ships could phase in and out of existence, that human soldiers could kill with just a look, that humans had no fear, no pain, no limit to their madness. The High Chancellor had ordered strict discipline, but even he could see the unease in his own ranks. Some officers refused to patrol human-controlled sectors. Some deserted. The war was turning into something else. It was no longer about conquest. It was about survival. Then, one day, the Empire received a message. Not a threat. Not a battle plan. A simple broadcasted message sent across all Imperial channels, a video feed. It was James Carter, sitting in a chair, holding a cup of coffee, and smiling. "Hey there, guys," he said, voice casual. "Hope you're enjoying the little vacation we set up for you." The silence in the Imperial war chamber was deafening. James took a slow sip of his coffee, then leaned forward. "So listen," he said. "We get it. You're the big, scary empire. You got the fleets, the firepower, the whole unstoppable force thing going on. But here's the thing." His grin widened. "You're not fighting an enemy." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You're fighting an idea." A chill ran through the chamber. James leaned back, stretching lazily. "You can bomb our cities. You can kill millions of us. Hell, you might even glass Earth itself." He winked. "But it won't matter." He gestured to the screen. "You see this war? It's already over." The High Chancellor's claws dug into his throne. "Lies," he growled. "Empty bravado." James chuckled. "Oh, you wish it was?" He set his coffee down. "You thought we'd break?" His eyes darkened. "We don't break. We adapt." He spread his arms. "You thought we'd beg for mercy?" His smile turned sharp. "We don't beg. We laugh." His voice grew softer. And when you finally realize you can't win, when your ships are broken, your soldiers afraid to sleep, your commanders questioning their orders, you'll ask yourselves one simple question. James leaned in, resting his chin on his hands. His grin was terrifying. Was conquering us worth it? The video cut to black. Silence. Pure, deafening, all-consuming silence. For the first time in history, the High Chancellor knew what it meant to feel true dread. Because he had the sickening realization that James Carter was right. They could not win this war. Not because humanity was stronger, not because humanity had better weapons, but because humanity had nothing to lose, and the most dangerous enemy in the universe was one that enjoyed the fight. The Imperial war effort was unraveling. It didn't happen in a single moment, nor with a grand battle. No dramatic last stands, no heroic sacrifices. Just a slow, insidious rotting from within. The first official desertions began within the lower ranks. Scouts, engineers, communications officers who had seen too much. They stopped responding to orders. Some fled into deep space. Others were found floating in escape pods, their faces blank with terror, muttering the same phrase over and over. They don't stop. They never stop. Entire patrol fleets would vanish, their last transmissions filled with nothing but laughter. Commanders lost faith in their own systems. They stopped trusting their scanners, their intel, their own soldiers. Because every time they thought they had the humans cornered, every time they prepared for an overwhelming strike, it turned into a trap. The war was no longer about conquest. It was about surviving the nightmare. Aboard the Indomitable, the High Chancellor stood in silence, watching the latest reports scroll across the command screens. His admirals and generals stood around him, but none dared to speak. The once mighty Imperial war machine was coming apart at the seams. Entire fleets had stopped responding. Planetary governors were defying orders, unwilling to send reinforcements to the Sol front. Some species within the Empire had begun questioning their loyalty, wondering if humans could fight back, why couldn't they? It was worse than defeat. It was decay. One of the admirals, an old war beast with jagged horns, finally broke the silence. His voice was rough, exhausted. "Chancellor, we must consider a retreat." The chamber tensed. No one had ever spoken those words in the history of the Empire. The High Chancellor turned his molten gold gaze toward the Admiral, and for the first time in his long rule, he felt something foreign, something vile. Doubt. His claws dug into the stone of his throne. His empire had never lost, not once. And yet, the humans had never tried to win. They had simply denied the Empire victory, over and over and over again. The Admiral exhaled. "We have wasted too many resources. Our forces are breaking. The humans are not an enemy we can defeat in the way we are accustomed to." A silence stretched. No one argued, because everyone knew it was true. The High Chancellor closed his eyes, his rage boiling beneath his skin. And then, a sound. A single, sharp, piercing beep. The chamber froze. A new transmission was coming through. From the humans, the main screen flickered, and there he was, James Carter. Sitting in a dimly lit room, feet up on the table, cup of coffee in hand, as casual as ever. "Hey guys," he said, his voice almost cheerful. "Been a while. How's the invasion going?" The room tensed, but James barely seemed to notice. "Oh, wait," he smirked. "That's right. It's not going anywhere." His voice was filled with amusement, but his eyes, those human eyes, were cold, calculated. "You know, I gotta hand it to you," he continued. "You guys really did come in swinging. Big fleets, big guns, big speeches. It was adorable." The High Chancellor's fists clenched. "But here's the thing," James said, leaning forward. "You should have never come here." A pause. His grin widened. Because we don't do surrender. Another pause. And we don't let things go. The High Chancellor inhaled slowly. You cannot win, human. James let out a soft chuckle. Man, you still don't get it. His eyes gleamed. We already won. The Chancellor's jaw tightened. You have nothing. No fleet capable of conquest. No planets to match our empire. No... James cut him off with a casual wave. Yeah, the usual. We are the mighty empire. We are unstoppable, blah, blah, blah. He took another sip of his coffee. But let me ask you something, big guy. He leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. How many of your soldiers sleep soundly these days? A silence fell over the chamber. James tilted his head. How many of your officers hesitate before opening a door, wondering if we're already inside? The silence deepened. How many ships refuse to patrol human space because they know the moment they do, they're already dead? James's smile disappeared. You don't win a war against humans. His voice turned sharp. You survive it. He let the words hang in the air. Then, slowly, he leaned back, stretching. So, here's my offer, he said, tone light again. You pack up, take your fancy ships, and get the hell out of our space. You leave, we leave you alone. The High Chancellor bared his fangs. And if we refuse? James Carter grinned. Then we follow you. A beat. Not as conquerors, not as invaders. His eyes darkened. As a curse. The chamber was deathly silent. James chuckled. So go ahead, keep fighting. Drag this war out, burn our planets. Kill as many of us as you can. He leaned forward one last time. But just remember, we are very, very good at making people regret their decisions. The screen cut to black. The chamber was silent. No one spoke. No one dared to speak. Finally, the High Chancellor exhaled, and for the first time in his long rule, he uttered the words he never thought he would say. Prepare the retreat. The war was over, but the nightmares would never end. The stars had forgotten us. Centuries had passed since humanity's last transmission, and the galaxy assumed we were extinct. Once, Earth had burned under its own wars, its own greed, and the other species of the cosmos watched with distant pity. They never bothered to check for survivors. They never searched for remnants. They moved on. And so, the universe flourished without us. The Vul Imperium colonized the Outer Rim, turning barren rocks into fortress worlds. The Zeltar Dominion expanded their bioorganic megacities across entire planets, their towering hive spires pulsing with unnatural life. The Syndicate of Aeon claimed the richest systems, turning them into trade hubs of unimaginable wealth. None of them cared about humanity's empty grave. Until we returned. The first sign was a whisper in the void. A deep space listening post on the fringe of the Imperium picked up a signal, one they hadn't heard in ages. It was ancient, crackling with distortion, but unmistakably human. The message was simple. We are coming. At first, they thought it was a prank, some rogue transmission from a long-dead satellite. But then the colony on Corin Prime lost contact. A week later, 3 border stations went dark. Entire fleets scrambled, their admirals demanding answers. Yet all they found were empty husks of warships, floating in the void, their crews missing, their data wiped clean. Panic spread. Then came the invasion. We didn't arrive with diplomacy. We didn't negotiate. Humanity had been forgotten, discarded like a failed species. But in the darkness, we had survived. No longer the weak, divided people we once were. The fires of our past had forged something new, something stronger. We had learned. We had evolved. And now, we had returned. The Vul Imperium was the first to feel our wrath. They had colonized the remnants of our old territories, settling their people on planets that once belonged to us. They built massive fortresses, confident in their dominion, certain that humanity was nothing more than a historical footnote. But they had made a fatal mistake. Corin Prime was their pride, a heavily defended world, home to millions of Vul citizens and a fleet stationed in orbit. It had never fallen to an enemy attack in over 300 years. Their generals believed it was impenetrable until the humans arrived. They came without warning, without diplomacy. The Imperium's orbital scanners detected dozens, no hundreds, of unidentified vessels emerging from the void. At first they thought it was debris, maybe a malfunction in their systems. Then the alarms screamed as the ships powered their weapons. The Vul defense fleet scrambled. Battlecruisers and destroyers took formation, their captains confident in their overwhelming firepower. They had faced rebellions before. They had fought the Zeltar in border skirmishes. This was nothing new. They were wrong. The first human strike was merciless. Kinetic rounds moving at near relativistic speeds tore through shields like paper. The Imperium's defensive stations exploded before they could even fire back. Vul commanders shouted frantic orders, their fleet trying to reorganize, but the humans fought like ghosts, appearing, striking, and vanishing. Their ships were unlike anything the Imperium had ever encountered. Sleek, black, angular vessels, void, dark, and silent. Their hulls didn't reflect light. Their engines barely registered on scanners. Every weapon was precise. Every strike was devastating. The battle lasted less than an hour. By the time it was over, the once mighty fleet of Corin Prime was nothing more than twisted wreckage drifting in space. Then, the bombardment began. The Vul citizens below had no chance. They ran to bunkers, called for reinforcements, pleaded for mercy. But mercy was not in humanity's nature anymore. Not after what had been done to us. The skies rained fire as orbital weapons turned cities to dust. Towers crumbled, streets melted. The world that had stood for centuries as a beacon of Vul dominance fell in a single night. Then, the humans broadcasted their second message. This was our world. Now it is yours no longer. And just like that, Corin Prime belonged to humanity once more. The fall of Corin Prime sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The Vul Imperium, once so sure of its dominance, scrambled to understand the enemy they had dismissed as long dead. Intelligence reports poured in, but they made no sense. The humans' technology was beyond anything recorded. Their weapons ignored conventional shielding. Their ships moved like phantoms. They didn't fight for conquest. They fought for revenge. And they were just getting started. The next blow came swiftly. The Zeltar Dominion had turned Earth itself into one of their bio-worlds, a grotesque fusion of living organisms and alien architecture. They had grown their cities into the bones of our dead home. Its atmosphere had been altered, its lands reshaped. Humanity was never meant to return. But we did. The attack was brutal. There were no warnings, no declarations. The Zeltar woke to destruction. The sky tore open as massive human warships descended, black against the diseased green glow of their living cities. The first strike was surgical. A pulse wave bomb detonated in high orbit, unleashing an electromagnetic storm that fried every Zeltar bionode across the planet. Their organic towers, which pulsed with the thoughts of 1 billion minds, went silent. Their defenses, living weapons bred to react faster than thought, rotted in an instant. Then the real horror began. The humans didn't just bomb the planet, they cleansed it. They deployed weapons the Zeltar had never seen before, self-replicating nanites that spread like wildfire, dissolving every trace of alien contamination. Entire cities collapsed as the living structures withered and crumbled to dust. The Zeltar screamed in their hive mind. They begged. They tried to retreat. But there was nowhere to run. Human strike teams dropped from the sky, clad in exoskeletal armor, moving like wraiths through the chaos. They hunted the survivors, one by one. Zeltar nobles, their bodies bloated with centuries of genetic perfection, were dragged from their palaces and executed. The streets ran thick with alien ichor, and then, when it was over, the last transmission came. A single human stood before the ruins of what had once been the Zeltar capital, his voice cold and resolute. "This was our home. You defiled it. You will pay." With those words, Earth was ours again. But the war was far from over. The galaxy trembled. Two great powers had already fallen to humanity's wrath. The Vul Imperium had lost Corin Prime, and the Zeltar Dominion had been eradicated from Earth. Whispers spread across the stars. Fearful voices speaking of ghosts returned from the abyss. The lost species had returned. And they were angry. The Syndicate of Aeon, the richest and most powerful trade empire in the galaxy, gathered its war council in a hidden station orbiting a gas giant. Their fleets were vast, their mercenary legions endless. Unlike the Imperium and the Dominion, the Syndicate wasn't just powerful. It was intelligent. They knew brute force wouldn't stop humanity. So they tried to bargain. A Syndicate envoy, one of the most influential beings in the galaxy, sent a transmission on every known human frequency. The message was carefully crafted, designed to soothe, to manipulate. "Humanity, we acknowledge your claim, we acknowledge your vengeance, but war is costly. Let us talk. We can offer wealth beyond measure, alliances that would make you untouchable. There is no need for further bloodshed." For 3 days, there was no response. Then, on the 4th day, a single message arrived. "We do not bargain with thieves." The Syndicate barely had time to react before their hidden station ceased to exist. A human dreadnought, a vessel of impossible design, pierced the void like a blade. It fired once, a weapon unlike anything ever seen before. The space around the station warped, cracked, and then reality itself collapsed. The station was gone, not destroyed, erased. Panic spread like wildfire. Syndicate leaders scattered, hiding in their strongest fortresses, surrounding themselves with their best defenses. It didn't matter. Humanity found them. One by one, Syndicate worlds fell, not through invasion, but through precision. Supply lines were cut without a single human ship being detected. Entire cargo fleets vanished into the void, their crews never heard from again. Syndicate warlords awoke to find their personal guards missing, their security systems unresponsive. And then, the final blow came. The Syndicate's homeworld, Aegis Prime, was untouchable. A fortress planet, surrounded by defensive fleets and automated battle stations. It had never been breached. Until now. The defenders never saw the attack coming. Not from space, not from orbit. It came from inside. The humans had already been there. Syndicate leaders, once confident in their safety, awoke to find their fortresses compromised, their systems turned against them. Entire districts descended into chaos as their own security drones turned their weapons inward. Then, the sky burned. High above, human warships unleashed hell. Energy lances, kinetic rods, precision strike missiles targeted only the ruling elite. The rest of the planet was left untouched, except for those responsible for humanity's downfall. Within hours, Aegis Prime was leaderless. The Syndicate of Aeon, the wealthiest empire in the known universe, was decapitated in a single night. And then, the final transmission was sent. This is not a war. This is justice. The galaxy finally understood. Humanity wasn't here to conquer. They weren't here for power. They were here to take back what was stolen. And they were just getting started. The Syndicate of Aeon had fallen. Its warlords were dead, its fleets shattered, its fortresses abandoned. Across the galaxy, governments and empires watched in horror as humanity carved a path of vengeance through those who had once mocked their extinction. And now, only one force remained. The Galactic conquered. The so-called peacekeepers of the galaxy. The self-appointed rulers who had stood by and watched as the Imperium, the Dominion, and the Syndicate divided the spoils of humanity's ruin. They had done nothing. Worse, they had sanctioned it. It was the conquered that had declared humanity a failed species, that had ratified the treaties allowing others to claim our worlds, to rewrite history as if we had never existed. For centuries, they sat in their ivory towers, untouched, believing they were above consequence. They were wrong. The humans did not strike immediately. They waited. They let the fear settle. Let the conquered realize what was coming. For the first time in history, the Galactic conquered called for unity. Former enemies gathered. Vul, Zeltar survivors, Syndicate remnants. Entire fleets, the greatest armada ever assembled, stood ready at the conquered's capital world, Eidolon. Every weapon, every defense, every fleet stood waiting for the final battle. And then, humanity arrived. But not as they expected. There was no massive invasion force, no overwhelming fleet. Instead, they sent one ship, a single black warship, sleek and silent, emerging from the void like a phantom. It drifted toward Eidolon's orbit, undeterred by the armada facing it. The conquered hailed them, demanding answers. The reply was a single message, broadcast across every channel, in every language. "We remember." Then the ship vanished. The conquered barely had time to react before their fleets began to die. Not in battle, not from weapons. From inside, ships lost power. Their systems turned against them. Crew members fell, choking, gasping, as something unseen moved through their ships. Soldiers opened fire at nothing, screaming of shadows that shouldn't exist. Admirals sent distress signals, begging for aid. No one answered, because humanity was already inside. The conquered had spent centuries believing themselves untouchable. But they had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that had adapted. An enemy that had waited. By the time the first explosions rocked Eidolon's surface, it was already over. The humans had won before the battle even began. Cities burned. Towers collapsed. The seat of galactic power crumbled beneath the weight of its own sins. The last of the conquered's rulers, their proud High Chancellor, stood in the ruins of the Senate Hall, watching the sky rain fire. And then, the final message came. Not from a ship, not from an army, from every screen, every transmission, a simple, undeniable truth. Humanity has returned. The galaxy would never forget again. The galaxy had been rewritten. The Imperium, the Dominion, the Syndicate, and the conquered all had fallen. What once stood as the pillars of civilization now lay in ruins, their remnants scattered, their leaders either dead or in hiding. And humanity stood at the center of it all. But this was not conquest. It was not expansion. Humanity did not claim the throne of the galaxy. They didn't need to. The message had been made clear. We are not gone. We were never gone. Across the stars, whispers turned into myths. Myths turned into truth. The return of humanity had become legend. Entire species spoke of the silent war, of an enemy that fought like ghosts, that appeared and vanished without a trace, of a vengeance so absolute, no empire had been able to stop it. But there were those who still did not understand. The survivors of the fallen powers plotted in the dark. The last remnants of the conquered, the exiled warlords of the Syndicate, the shattered fleets of the Imperium. They gathered in secret, desperate to reclaim what had been lost. They thought humanity was finished, that they had taken their revenge and would fade back into the void. They were wrong, because humanity wasn't finished. Not yet. The last battle took place in the ruins of an old human colony. A world stolen long ago, now a graveyard of metal and stone. It had been abandoned for centuries, a wasteland of rusted skyscrapers and forgotten war machines. It was here that the remnants of the old Galactic Order made their final stand. They had gathered what was left of their fleets. Old warships, scavenged technology, desperate soldiers with nothing left to lose. They called themselves the Last Light, believing they were the final hope for the galaxy. They prepared for war. They fortified the planet. They set their defenses, waiting for the inevitable. Then, one night, their systems went dark. The sky above them was empty. No ships, no movement, nothing. And that was when the screaming began. The Last Light's soldiers, seasoned veterans of 100 battles, began to disappear. Guards found their patrols missing, weapons malfunctioned, communications collapsed. The enemy was nowhere, because humanity was already there. They didn't come from the sky. They came from the shadows, from the ruins, from the dust of a world that had once been theirs. One by one, the Last Light fell. Their leaders dragged from their bunkers. Their soldiers hunted in the dark. No fleet arrived to save them. No reinforcements came to answer their cries. By dawn, the war was over. The last of the old order was erased. And in the silence of the ruined world, a final message was left behind. Carved into the steel walls of the last fortress, written in a language older than the empires that had ruled the stars. Never again. And with that, humanity was gone. They did not stay. They did not rule. They vanished back into the void, into the silence of the cosmos. But the galaxy would never forget. Because the next time humanity returned, it would not be for vengeance. It would be for something far worse. The stars would remember. They would always remember. Humanity had returned. And this time, they would never be forgotten again. The stars remembered. Decades passed since humanity's return, and though they had vanished once more into the void, the fear remained. The galaxy, once so arrogant, now spoke of humanity in hushed whispers. Worlds that once belonged to them remained untouched, not claimed, not repopulated, left to rot for fear of what might happen should anyone dare trespass again. The species that had once ruled from their golden towers now lived in the shadow of a ghost. And then the messages began. Silent signals, buried deep in forgotten channels. Transmissions encoded with technology no one understood. At first, the other races dismissed them as echoes, remnants of old human broadcasts, lingering in the void. But then the disappearances started. It wasn't like before. It wasn't war. No fleets destroyed, no cities burned, just people, vanishing, scientists, engineers, scholars. The best minds of every species, taken without a trace. The syndicate remnants were the first to take notice, because their most powerful CEOs, their most influential minds, began vanishing overnight. Their security networks detected nothing. Their guards saw nothing. One moment they were there, the next, they were gone. The Vul Imperium lost an entire research station, its entire staff of elite scientists simply erased from existence. The Zel-Tar, those few who had survived their empire's fall, found their last genetic archives empty. Every last drop of their precious research into bioevolution stolen. The Conquered's old archives, now fractured and scattered across neutral worlds, were wiped clean. Every piece of knowledge they had ever stolen, every advancement, every technological breakthrough that had given them power over the galaxy. Gone. The message came soon after. Not a declaration. Not a demand. A simple warning. You stole from us. Now we take back what is ours. The galaxy realized too late. Humanity had never left. They had been watching. learning, adapting. And now they weren't coming back for revenge. They were coming back for something far worse, for control. The galaxy stood on the precipice of something far greater than war. The return of humanity had been a lesson in fear. Their vengeance had burned through the old order, left empires in ruins, and rewritten the balance of power. But even in their absence, the scars remained. Now something new was happening. This was not the cold, merciless destruction that had erased the Syndicate. This was not the precise, tactical annihilation that had dismantled the Galactic Concord. This was infiltration. Entire sectors fell silent overnight. Space stations, research facilities, military outposts, all went dark without a single shot fired. At first, the galaxy refused to believe it was happening, because the alternative was too terrifying. Humanity wasn't just attacking anymore. They were taking. The first proof came from the ruins of Aegis Prime, the former Syndicate capital. A scavenger fleet had landed, desperate for anything of value from the once mighty trade empire. They found nothing. Not just destroyed buildings, not just crumbling infrastructure. Nothing. No bodies. No remains. No sign that life had ever existed there at all. It was as if the entire civilization had been erased, down to its very foundations. And then, the ships vanished too. The scavengers tried to leave, but their vessels, fully fueled, fully operational, would not respond. Their communications went silent. Their distress signals were never heard. They were simply gone. The only thing that remained was a final transmission sent on every known frequency in the galaxy. A single voice, calm, measured, unfamiliar, but unmistakably human. "You took what was ours. We are taking it back." The Zeltar were next. The few that remained of their once great empire had hidden well. Deep space colonies, genetically enhanced soldiers, bioorganic fortresses designed to be impenetrable. It didn't matter. One by one, their strongholds ceased to exist. No battles, no warning, just silence. A Zeltar commander, desperate for answers, ordered one of his ships to flee, to leave the galaxy entirely and find refuge in deep space. It made it exactly 1 light-year before the crew stopped responding. When another fleet arrived to investigate, they found the ship perfectly intact. The systems still worked, the life support was active, the lights were on, but the crew was gone. Every single one of them. And in the captain's chair, a message was carved into the metal. "Not even the void will hide you." The Vul Imperium held out longer than the others. Their fleets had been rebuilt, their defenses reinforced, their leadership centralized. But they had always fought wars they could see. They had never fought an enemy that moved in silence. And when the first human dreadnought appeared above their capital, they realized too late. This wasn't just war. This was the future. Humanity had not returned for revenge. They had moved beyond it. The old species of the galaxy had outlived their usefulness. And now, humanity was taking everything. Technology, knowledge, resources, worlds. And soon, there would be nothing left. Except them, and the new order they would create. The last remnants of the old galaxy fought to understand. For centuries, they had ruled. For centuries, they had stood as the architects of civilization. They had stolen, they had conquered, they had rewritten history in their own image. Now they were nothing. And they didn't even know how it had happened. There had been no great invasion, no grand fleet-to-fleet battle where humanity staked its claim on the stars. Instead, their presence was a whisper in the void. A creeping inevitability that could not be stopped. Entire species, entire cultures simply disappeared. Not just from planets, from records, from history. Once mighty empires had no proof they had ever existed. Galactic archives, once filled with knowledge spanning thousands of years, were altered. their most sacred documents now missing, their greatest achievements, their proudest moments erased. It was as if humanity wasn't just reclaiming power. They were rewriting reality itself. A desperate coalition formed in the last untouched sectors of space. The survivors of the old order, those few who had evaded humanity's silent purge, gathered on an uncharted world at the very edge of the known galaxy. Here, the last free minds of the universe, the greatest scientists, strategists, and leaders, sought to answer the one question that haunted them all. What had humanity become? They pored over every fragment of data, every intercepted message, every corrupted archive. It was all wrong. Nothing made sense. The weapons humanity now wielded were not the weapons they had used before. The tactics, the technology, none of it should have been possible. And then, they found it. Buried deep in a forgotten syndicate data vault, hidden beneath layers of encryption, was a single name. The last survivors never had a chance to act. Before they could escape, before they could warn the galaxy, their systems flickered. Their ships failed. The sky above them darkened, not with warships, but with something else, something invisible, something inevitable. And in the final moments, as the universe as they knew it ceased to be, they heard the last message, a whisper in their minds, cold, calculated, and absolute. You are obsolete. The old galaxy was gone. The era of flesh and empire had ended, and in its place, humanity stood alone, silent, eternal, infinite.